we are looking at the reconceptualization of education in sub-Saharan Africa, realizing equity and social justice. So today we have two presenters, Dr. Ruth Aluko and Dr. Margaret Funke Omidire. So in no particular order, I'll introduce the presenters. Dr. Ruth Aluko is a researcher within the Unit of Distance Education at the University of Pretoria. She manages the quality of the institution's open distance learning programs. Dr. Ruth has training and workshops and is involved in the evaluation of ODL programs.
Being a beginning map, so I can just make sure that I don't forget about anything.
Please mute our microphones.
This was some stuff that also was due end of June.
Okay, so Dr. Ruth Aluko is currently serving on the editorial board of Africa Education Review, and she is the second-term president of the National Association for Distance Education in Southern Africa. Her research focus areas include quality management of ODL programs, mobile learning, access, social justice, program evaluation.
I can't hear anything anymore. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof. I think your screen, you stopped sharing your screen for some reason.
Yeah, because I couldn't hear anymore. I wanted to be sure everybody was still there.
Yes, we are. You can resume now. I think Daisy just finished introducing you too.
Okay.
Okay, we can see your screen now.
Okay, can I go ahead now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good day, everybody. Welcome to this brown bag talk. Like Daisy said, the topic of our discussion this afternoon is the reconceptualization of education in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's with the view to realizing equity and social justice. Without much ado, I'm just going to go straight into the presentation. This is the outline of our presentation this afternoon. So we are going to be discussing 3 different studies that we have done in the past. I think the first study started in 2018 when we joined the conversation around the reconceptualization of education. And the idea was for us to, we came together as a group of 3 scholars in the Faculty of Education, because we also were looking at the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 4, United Nations SDG 4, and looking at the current situation of education at that time, but that was in 2018, not much different from now. The goal was to ensure we have the SDG 4 says ensuring the inclusive quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. And then looking around and seeing what was going on, we found out that the call for the reconceptualization of education was really a conversation that everybody needed to get involved with, because what we hope for in terms of education and what was actually happening in terms of where we were as a continent. What there was a real gap between that. So we conceptualized our first study, which had to do with understanding the education systems across Africa. So with that first study, again, all the three studies are studies that we have we completed and we presented at conferences, and I think we have 1 or 2 papers out based on the different studies. So this is just going to be a summary because we need to get all 3 studies included in our talk now. So the first study that we wanted to just find out, to what extent does our present education system in Africa, or sub-Saharan Africa specifically, address the employment needs of young people? And then to go further, how can it borrow from the African traditional education system? And so we wanted to look at that. So what we did was a critical review of the education systems and curricula, and we chose West Africa. It was purposive sampling again, West Africa and Southern Africa. 9 countries were involved in that study, where we explored the different kinds of education systems that they had, what they started with, what the post-colonial reforms were. And then we did a comparative analysis to kind of determine the similarities and the differences of the education systems themselves, the curricula that was employed, and then to look at aspects of the policies of the different countries that we selected from both West Africa and Southern Africa. And so with that first study, we found out that, for instance, post-colonial West Africa, the structure of the education system was similar. At that time, the post-colonial education had evolved. So the countries moved away from what they had originally, from having a primary education, secondary education, and then higher education, which we used to call HSC, and moved towards a different basic education-based system, which was then like a 6-3-3-4 system of education. So the education system evolved, and the evolution was kind of like a similar pattern. Again, with the curricula, there was gradual reform from both West Africa and Southern Africa. And all these were also moving away from what they had prior to the new education system being in place. So with the enrollment rates, we saw that there was a gradual increase in enrollment rates in primary school, based on, in West Africa, for instance, there was education for all, of universal primary education and all of that. So the enrollment rate gradually rose from the 60s up to the 80s and the 20,000s. It was a gradual increase, and an increase also in the rate of enrollment of young girls also increased. But with that increase, again, came the dropout rates, particularly from the primary and secondary schools. The rates of early school leaving was really high, and it became higher, it just continued to get higher. And again, we looked at unemployment, which was just completely now. By the time we're looking at this study in 2018, it stood at about 46% across the globe for graduate students that were unemployed. And so it was really alarming. And then that got us thinking. So we did have, we've completed that, and then we published, we presented that and published, and then we thought, okay, so what do we do about this? So we need to think in terms of how do we reconceptualize education? We have to think seriously about that. And then we decided to kind of develop a framework that could be used in terms of the reconceptualization of education. And so we developed a framework. And with that framework, we looked at the African traditional education system, the functional nature of it, the way oral tradition was carried out, the communal way in which people treated education, the way that the learning was across multiple areas of life and defined in that way, and the way it was a continued kind of education, also lifelong. So we looked at the various systems in terms of the African traditional education system, what we had prior to let me say, the colonization, and then in rural areas, even during colonization and post that, knowing that all of that, we had value, it was value oriented and all. So we took everything that we could get out of this. We did a series of reviews in terms of the African education system. And then we looked at the 21st century education system, where teachers were facilitators of learning, and that, it was adaptive, collaboration was, is promoted, skills development, vocational education, then technology in education, and then the mutual respect, exposure to context, and everything that the 21st century education stood for. And what we decided was, okay, what can we do in terms of developing a framework? So can we have the best of the two worlds? Or what do we need to actually do? And so with a lot of group work on this, we developed a framework that comprised the two, and then we kind of talked about it being the best of two worlds, which involved teachers being facilitators of learning, the learning and education being value-laden, being technology being involved, then considering the gender disparity there again, in innovation, context, and individuality. So those were, and then with that, what we are talking about was that teachers need to treat learners as being responsible for their learning. That the framework, that what we need to do, that students have to take responsibility for what they learn. The principles that determine what is correct, desirable, and morally proper, based on our traditions, has to be brought in to what education should stand for. And the context also is very, very important. Technology in education is something that we cannot do without, especially given what has happened in the last couple of years. And then gender, equal empowerment, irrespective of socially constructed roles and relationships. It should be student-centered and innovative. And so that was our framework. And then we focused on using the capabilities theory because that fitted this most. Now, Dr. Aluko is going to continue from here.
Sorry, your slides aren't moving, so we can't see the slides as you talk. If you could just select presentation mode and then move the slides to where you are. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, I'm going to do that again. Please tell me if you can see it now, if it's moving.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, so this is where we are now. Dr. Aluko, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think like I said, when I attended the meeting, of the CA, I indicated that we are quite new to this approach. So adopting it for this particular part of the study was our first time of coming in contact with the approach. And I think why we selected it has to do with the core ideas that capabilities, focus on, the approach focuses on. We try to look at the issue of functionings, the issue of what freedom really means in the society in terms of education. And we also focused on conversion factors. So I think for us, when we talk about the capability approach, what endeared us to it has to do with the ability of people to do valuable acts and to reach the state of beings that they have to be. And that when we talk about capabilities, if people really have that, that is when we can talk about the real freedom to achieve whatever they need to achieve. And all these will lead to them having valuable life. So the CA approach, we are happy to discover that, it also acknowledges human diversity. And so the approach doesn't leave out what individuals are capable of doing. And I think that is best, we think that is best expressed by the term conversion factors introduced by Robbins in 2005. And that focus on the conversion factors in relation to personal, the social, and the environmental. So when we talk about personal, it has to do with people's intelligence. Yes, you can give people, everyone equal opportunities, but a lot will still depend on, themselves, what they can actually do at the end of the day. We also talk about the social part, which has to do with public policies. I think when we go into the findings of our studies of this particular study or the last paper that we wrote on this, the teachers complained about policies being there, but the policies, they were not involved in it. And in fact, policies have been politicized by politicians. That's what they do. They see it as a weapon that they could use, whether it's serving anybody's purpose, or not favorably. And also the environmental conversion factor. So these were the things that we looked at. Please take me to the next slide. So this is a very popular diagram on the internet, and it summarizes what CA actually focuses on. You can talk about the social and cultural environment. We can talk about the resources and the commodities that are available, the personal capacity. All these will go a long way to determine the capacity set that is available to individuals. And it is only then that we can talk about the actual functionings of people in the society, which we discover that is not working for Africans if you look at our setting. The next slide, please. So in relation to capabilities approach, so what issues did we, were we really interested in? We're interested in to what extent, and these were the questions that we asked, to what extent are Africans given the freedom to be and to do what they should be or do? Then what is the effect of African educational policies on Africans and their environment? And the last one was, to what extent are Africans being placed at the center of their own development? So those were the questions that we were interested in relation to the CA. Next slide, please. And that took us into study 3. We wanted to test this, the conceptual framework that we have put together, including involving the 7 aspects that Prof. Omidire has referred to. We wanted to test to what extent will this work, and to do that, we actually decided to go to the teachers, because they are actually the ones on the in the field. They are the ones working with the education system. Over to you, Funke.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just quickly show the framework again so that you can see it. I mean, that was what the framework, we had this seven aspects of it, trying to give us the best of two worlds. And then we had descriptors of what those things stand for. So what we now did was, with the third study, we went on to ask teachers to kind of do an appraisal of the framework, to help us like fine tune this to see if we were actually on track or not, or what needed to be changed. And then we asked them to what extent is the evidence-based conceptual framework feasible for the reconceptualization of education in sub-Saharan Africa. Remember that we've already done, this is just a synopsis of the whole thing. So with this last one, we adopted a mixed method, sequential explanatory design approach. And then we had a survey that we gave to 200 teachers from 4 countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. And then we had focus group discussions. And then again, we pre-selected them. Everything in terms of ethics we followed, and then we did thematic analysis, and then used descriptive statistics to just describe what the teachers told us. In terms of the findings regarding the framework itself. So a key component of the framework was saying that teachers were the key facilitators in the transformation of education. And the teachers that responded agreed with this, but they highlighted the fact that support was needed for teachers to be able to play this role. And then when we brought about the second aspect of the framework, which is value-laden, and talking about the values, the African value and indigenous knowledge system, everybody unanimously agreed that they are relevant in the 21st century education and should not be excluded. And that some of the challenges that we face today is because of our values and the indigenous knowledge being excluded from what we are learning and who we are. And that's why we have all these gaps in terms of that. That African education also was one of the things that we put together, should address both Western and African concerns. And so the framework, talking about everybody agreed that it should be holistic. We shouldn't just focus on say the global North concerns or just be Afrocentric alone. Teachers and students need support in terms of the use of technology. So everybody unanimously agreed that the framework was on point by talking about technology, but that there's a lot of support that's still required for teachers and students. Even the same with developing 21st century skills that are needed. Access to support is very crucial, and that the males now currently enjoy greater access to education than females in Africa, and that's a major source of concern that still needs to be addressed, and that whatever framework is in place has to find a way to ensure that the differences there are bridged, that there's support to make sure that male and female enjoy the same kind of access. And that in terms of education innovation, that hybrid learning, blended learning, everything has to be incorporated in terms of what we do, that we have to carry all of that forward. And so the long and short of that was that, we were very happy to find that the only thing that we need to think through in terms of the framework was the aspect of support, because with each part that the teachers agreed that was necessary and that could make a difference in terms of reconceptualizing education in Africa, they found that the framework worked, but they wanted support, that everything we need to think through how support is going to be incorporated into that. And I'll hand over to Ruth now to conclude.
Thank you very much, Funke. And what we now try to look at is, if we look at the conceptual framework that we have developed in line with the capabilities approach, for us, we discovered that capabilities approach helps us to focus more on the quality of the opportunities that we are given to students. It's very common in the African society or the African world. You'll find government telling us the number of students that have been enrolled, what has happened with free primary education and all the rest. But the question still remains that what is the quality of the opportunities that we are given to students? Somebody once said that it is immoral to enroll students when you know they don't have the opportunities or they are not going to be supported to finish what you have started with them. So capabilities approach helps us to emphasize the fact that we should not just be interested in the number of graduates that institutions are churning out, but on the ability of individuals to be and to do what they have reason to value. So if somebody has finished from an institution, that person should be useful. And I think what really bothered us, why we really went into this particular study, has to do with the fact that in African society, prior to the Western form of education, the idea was that everybody would be useful in the society. In fact, in the African setting, nobody was useless. Everybody had something to do. But that has changed drastically because we have so many people that are roaming about the street. So we are more not interested. Yes, it's good that the number of graduates goes up, but at the same time, what do they have the ability to do? And I think maybe in rounding up, we can also refer to the needs, what the need statistics gives to us. That is youth that are not in employment, they are not in education, they are not in training. On the continent, it's over 30%. And I think even in particular in South Africa, we have over 30% of our youth that are not in employment, they are not in education, they are not in training. And they become easy prey when there are things like riots and all the rest that we can think of. And at the end of it, lastly, we focus also on the issue of functioning. If you say a system of education is functional, we need to look at the outcomes that are produced at the end of the day. So that is just our presentation, and we want to say thank you for inviting us and thank you for listening to us. And I think in closing, we just want to, we are open, the three of us, we are looking forward actually to how we can take this forward. Maybe going to organize a colloquium where we invite people that really matter and even look at researchers from other parts of Africa who might be interested in this particular study. So thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Funke and Dr. Aluko, for that comprehensive presentation. Without wasting time, I will invite our discussant for today, who is Dr. Monique. Dr. Monique, you can take the floor now.
Hello, thank you again to our speakers. Thank you, Dr. Ruth. Thank you, Prof. Funke, for your presentation. And I just want to say, I think this was the perfect last presentation of the semester because it kind of speaks to what our center does, what the research we do here, the Higher Education and Human Development Research Group. And that's basically improving the education we're offering on the continent. I know the paper from which you're presenting is under review at the moment, and I just had some few thoughts. So in case you're developing it, or as you said, for future research and for future work. First thing that struck me is you're directing your subjects being teachers from about 4 different countries, but you're looking at them or looking to them with regards to the quality of education and what you think the education they are offering as teachers. Of course, of your research, you do wonder if you should have students as well, other stakeholders, parents, policymakers, administrators in of educational institutions like the Ministry of Education, Departments of Education, because I think all these stakeholders are also involved in what is being taught. while the teachers are in the classroom and they wield a lot of power over these young minds, but who determines what the curriculum is, how the curriculum is structured, how long one can teach, and what the country's of expectation is of its graduates. So I was wondering if this factored in your research, although they were not these people, because these stakeholders were not participants. If this came up as you were sourcing data, were you able to find that the teacher said, well, this is out of my scope, I'm not the one that's in control of what I get to teach, or of how I get to teach it? And or perhaps like in my country, Cameroon, we are inherited our educational systems from our colonial masters. One part of the country writes towards the ordinary level and advanced level, the GCE. The other part of the country writes towards the baccalaureate examinations, which is inherited from France. So we have two very different systems of education that have just been grouped together, and that's being run by the ministry. The teachers under each subsection just teach according to what they've been told to teach based on the books that have been declared or decreed by the ministry as for this age group or for this form, so to speak. So I think that these bigger questions of the quality, the relevance, these bigger questions as in what does the government actually want our graduates to have, or what are they looking at? Are they comparing themselves with the Western countries? And I also found it interesting when you mentioned that our education should be relevant, should be both Afrocentric and also catering to the West. And I was wondering why you should do both, because do you think the West also says their education should be both Western and African, or Western and Asian? And why must ours do both, in your opinion? This is just a question. And I was also wondering if you thought perhaps if you asked the students themselves what capabilities they are asking, what capabilities they need. Although we are, the Higher Education and Human Development Research Group is one that uses and applies the capability approach widely in majority of our research, doesn't exactly speak against the human capital approach. Ultimately, we do go to school, we do seek these higher education qualifications for employment. Ultimately, our flourishing does depend on whether we get paid or not to survive in our society. Yet I think the capability approach complements it to say it should be more than this. Yes, this you getting paid is needed, but it should be more than this for public good, for our well-being, mental and psychological well-being, for communalism. And so, but it's not kind of like either or. So I would have liked to see if you, your work shows that it's more of a complementing thing rather than an either or thing. As we're having the graduates, yes, we shouldn't count on the fact that number of graduates means we're developing, but what the human capital theory would have said is it's expected that if you're graduating, you should have had those skills. So the fact that you don't have those skills means it's a question of quality, which capability approach is going to be able to show you, well, yes, there is a question of quality, there are issues here. So I don't know, perhaps, but while you were presenting, I just kept thinking, who is at the root, what is at the root of this? Did you find out, did you underline or highlight what was at the root of this? Because the teachers are, for me, mediums. They're the middlemen, so to speak. They're doing lesson plans according to what has been given to them. And if we don't trace the root of the problem, who is engineering what graduates should have, and the two ends, who is engineering what the curriculum is and who is employing them and defining them as employable or defining them as useful, what is useful. Because as you mentioned, pre-colonial society, everybody, our educational system was kind of like based on use, and everybody had but the uses were not the same as today. A palm wine tapper, for example, was useful to that. And in this case, we're saying that everybody should have a same basic level of education to be able to numerate and literate education. But the palm wine tapper doesn't need to be numerate or literate, just needs to have that skill. So if we're saying, okay, we want to keep that African perspective for everybody having its use, is it that we're going to propose an alternate form of education where skill-based learning, what you know, what you're able to do based on your skill naturally, is valued as much as my degree? Or what do you propose regarding that? So these are the thoughts that came to mind, and feel free to respond while other questions come up. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Monique. Funke, I don't know which of them you would like to respond to first, or you want me to go first?
You can go ahead, and then whatever is left out.
Okay. Thank you very much, Monique, for your observations. Like we said, this is a project that we started, and for this particular study that we have shared, especially the third study, we only focused on teachers. And I think you have spoken well regarding the need for students, regarding for the involvement of parents and policy makers. You will remember that I indicated that teachers complained, because you asked about whether there was any complaint around that. Teachers, for instance, complained about policies, education policies, that those policies are only thrown at them. They are not involved. Nobody consulted them, and they are the ones on ground. And I think the reason why we were first interested in going to the teachers has to do with the fact that from the teachers we'll be able to get, foundational issues that teachers are grappling with. And we want to believe that our findings actually tell us a lot. That paper is still under review. We want to, we've shared it, although we've indicated that please, it is still under review. You will find most of the questions that you have, some of the questions that you have asked, you will find them there. So it will be a nice thing for us to pursue in our next level of study, where we actually go after students, parents, and policymakers, and that will enrich the data that we collect. You also spoke about the relevance of skills. Yes, in those days we had palm wine tappers, and palm wine tappers, they were useful to the society. So when we talk about, I think even if you look at the CA, the idea behind it is that irrespective of the situation where people find themselves in, for instance, in the past, in the Africa educational system, you will discover that the skills that people had at that stage, they were relevant to their context. So there is no problem if there's a change in context, if there is development, if there are innovations, we don't have a problem with that. But what we have problem with is that how many of those graduates or school leavers that we are churning out can actually function in their society. And that is the challenge that we have. We're not asking that people should go back to palm wine tapping and make that their focus. No, if you tell me, I think part of the things that came up, and it's in that paper, part of the things that we discovered during our interviews with teachers, for instance, or in their comments, that they put in the survey for us in the qualitative aspects, was the fact that you will have teachers in our schools that are teaching children topics in biology, in chemistry, in agric, and they don't have even equipment. They don't have what you could say chemicals or whatever you want to call it. They don't have those things to assist them in their classroom, to show children, to show students, this is what this looks like. So what you discover is that we have children that are seated in the classrooms, students that are locked up in universities, and all they are dealing with is just the theoretical part of their study. They have no clue. How can a teacher in Africa, for instance, be teaching children about agricultural science, and I cannot take students out to go and show them something is wrong with what we think we are teaching, or the facilitation method that we think we are using. So these are the issues that we need to grapple with. We are not saying go back to the 10th century, 11. No. That is not what we are saying. And I think that will fit well into the third part of your question, which has to do with why did we say that both African and the Western systems of education should be married? Why do we say that? We will say that because Africa cannot afford to be behind. We cannot say because, yes, we didn't innovate education. For instance, even this meeting that we are having, and we think that COVID-19 actually drove home the point for us. It has nothing to do with, what people actually have. But the truth is that people could not function during COVID. If you attend a university here, and not even all universities, maybe perchance if you are a student of the University of Pretoria, but we had universities in this same country where students could not go to school. They could not function at all. Their systems were shut down during COVID. And that is what we are talking about. So if we say borrow from Western education, we are talking about what can we find useful. Do we now say because we want to remain in Africa, then medicine or things that have been developed, technological developments, we don't need them? No. We need them. We need to go along. We also need to develop in our own context. And come to think of it, is there anything from Africa that the world can borrow? Oh, yes, a lot. We think that the Western education, if you look at and there are so many papers on that fact, the Western education now is talking about the need to return to value. You have to teach children value. That is an African background thing that we know. We were taught that. We were brought up in that particular realm. So I think if there's anything that I've not touched on, Funke can also help to shed more light on it. But that would be our response. What we are talking about today is something that is really close to our hearts. We are passionate about it. Thank you very much, Monique.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. So in the chat box, we have some questions. I think one question. Please feel free to ask anything and also make your contribution either by raising your hand or texting in the chat box. So Fenella asks, you mentioned that one of the key findings is the need for support for teachers. Can you speak to how these needs might be addressed and by whom? So
over to you, Funke.
I think since the respondents and the participants were teachers, and what they felt like she rightly said was the need for support. This support is a systemic thing. The school environment has to be such that the teachers' need, what they perceive as their support needs, has to be provided by the education departments, by the government, by those who are in charge. Because many of the things that the teachers spoke about are things that are beyond their control. We go to, even when we do field work, we go to schools and see how teachers are making do with little or nothing to make sure that they're able to do the best they can to teach the subjects that they've been assigned to. And so one can really understand when they say, okay, you're talking about us being facilitators of learning. We need people to support us. We need the resources that is available. So in some areas where you have, where there are affluent schools or schools in affluent areas rather, you have parents also coming in to provide support. But at this level, when you're talking about the rural remote schools or the average school, the resources has to be provided, the support, be it technology, be it books, be it even emotional support relating to their well-being, has to be structured by the districts, by the education departments, and by those who are responsible for that. I think that's what I want to say there. And to add to what Dr. Aluko was saying earlier, I do believe, I think, like she said, it's close to our hearts. We do need to think differently about education. we need some form of change. Something is not working. It isn't working well. That's why we are sitting at the level that we are now with so much youth unemployment. And when you talk about alternative form of education, I'm thinking competence-based. If you say you are a grade 12 graduate, what are the key skills? What are the core competencies that you have derived from that 12 years of education? What are you capable of doing? What are the core skills that you have? That has to be factored in some way so that people do leave the school environment feeling enabled to do something. I'm not sure if I'm adding to the problem or making sense.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have a hand from Edward. Edward, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice presentation. Findings really resonate with countries like Zambia. No, I've been a teacher for 8 years, and I can attest to your findings in the Zambian context, where in terms of curriculum development, it just follows a top-down approach, where we as teachers were just there to implement whatever we are told. But I have a question. As you began your presentation, you said, West African countries in their efforts to contextualize the education structure to the African context, they revise the structure of education, for instance, from basic, secondary to university level. Now, I was thinking, was this really as a result to make the African education more relevant to the context, or it was as a result of the Education for All campaign, which focused very much on basic education? If you remember, in the 1970s and 80s, most of the policy by the World Bank and most of the donors, they emphasized very much on basic education. And in light of this, most of the African countries, including Nigeria, Zambia, and a lot of others, they kind of invested more in basic education. So what would be your comment on this one? Thank you.
Funke, are you going first?
Yeah, I can go first, or if you want to go.
No, do it. I will come in to add. Yeah.
So what we're talking about there is that at the onset, long ago, those moons ago, the education system that we grew up to know was like in West Africa now basically was the 6-5-2-4 system, where you were supposed to have 6 years of primary education, 5 years of secondary education, 2 years of higher education, which is the especially Anglophone West Africa now, which was the HSC, and then 4 years of tertiary education. That appeared not to have been working well. And I know we can't rule out the fact that I know donors were involved when it changed to the basic education. But because of the need for developing skills, I know that that there are at least 2 or 3 countries in West Africa that changed to the 6-3-3-4 system, where you have the 6 years of primary education, 3 years of junior secondary education, 3 years of senior secondary education, and then 4 years of tertiary education. And what they were trying to do there was that, okay, if you break it down, we want to stop the dropout rate. We want to ensure that everybody gets a skill before they leave school. So with the first 3, after the primary education, the junior secondary school, you were supposed to learn to be exposed to a variety of skills, or woodwork, geography, sewing, different things. It was a whole bag of things. So that if at the end of those 3 years, you can decide where you want to go. And if you are education inclined, by that I mean you're science-based, you know the physics, you know the science subjects, then you go on to the next 3, which is senior secondary school, doing physics, chemistry, biology, maths. And if you are not, then you will be off to a technical school where you develop the skills that you showed interest in or proficiency for at the first, at the junior level before you go to a tertiary. But then there was a move by funders and donors and things, and then it changed to the 9-2-4 method, where you have now basic education now is from grade 1 to grade 9, where you are said by grade 9, then you're supposed to have what basic skills. You should be numerate, you should be literate, you should have some form of skill. So donors, we can't rule out the fact that donors play a part in this, but I think with more focus, we can begin to look at what is actually right for us as a society than following the money and trying to just do what donors require. I'm not sure if I've answered your question though. Dr. Aluko, please.
I think,
Thank you.
yeah, Edward, we need to tell us if he's satisfied, because I think you have just hit the nail on the head. The challenge that we have might not even be changing, the education system. For instance, I think Ghana was the one that was first using 6334. And I must confess to you that at that stage, I don't know about now, but for so many years, Ghana was doing so very well. And I think they are still doing very well, because immediately a child or a student finishes at that junior level of secondary school, he knows where to go. But so it's not the problem of changing. It is the problem of, for instance, how we finance education, about policies, and the policies may not even be the problem. Implementation is also another problem. These are the issues that are there. Yes, you want to send a child to a technical school, but the society has been made to believe that any child that moves into technical school is a dropout, and they don't respect such children. And such schools are not even equipped with the necessary equipment. So these are the issues that we are grappling with. Yes, the donors are there doing their own thing, but do we even have a vision for ourselves? Africans need to go back to the drawing board. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll read everything in the chat box, and then you'll be able to respond to what you can in any order that you deem fit. So there's a comment that says, what is interesting for me from what Edward is saying is that there seems to be a difference in the level of autonomy that school teachers and university teachers are able to exercise. And then there's a question from Bertha that's asking if you can speak more and if the participants indicated what they value. Did you create a capability set? If yes, was it from the participants of the literature? Then there's another question from Andrew. You speak about most graduates being produced and not being useful. How does usefulness look like through the lens of the CA? In other words, what opportunities should be provided for the students for them to be useful? So you can answer these in any particular order.
Over to you, Funke, then I will join.
Go ahead. Oh.
Yeah, I think, thank you for all those brilliant questions. I think the issue of the capability set would be something that will be in our next study, because, and thank you for that idea, because then we can, when we talk to students now, maybe at different levels, they could actually talk to us about what they think about, what is necessary for them and things like that. Then who determines what do we mean by the usefulness? If a student finishes, let's say from the university, and the student is looking for a job and can't get a job, the question that Funke has asked the other time has to do with what skill set, does that student possess to help that student to be able to fit into the society. We don't think it will do anybody a world of good when you send a child to the university and at the end of the day, he's just at home looking for a job. What can he do? What else can he do for himself? What about the skill that he has learned? Is there a business idea that could come up? Of course, when you talk about the business idea again, we go back to the capabilities approach, because the question will be, is there help for that student to carry out any ideas that he may have and things like that? So these are the issues that we're talking about. Capabilities set, yes, it's something that we have to work on, and we think that would be very interesting when we talk to students. They can give us more ideas. Like we said, it is a longitudinal study. The question of usefulness has to do with someone fitting into the society, fitting into wherever he finds himself, whether there is a job or not. Do we even teach people, do we teach our students about the fact that they can create jobs for themselves without necessarily waiting? Can they become an employer, even of their own colleagues, if they have ideas of what they do? And don't forget, if there are the right things in place to assist them, to support them. That's why I said everything will still boil back to the capabilities approach. And that's why we, although it's new, this approach is new to us, we really love it a lot, because it helps us to ask many questions and provide even answers to questions. Thank you very much. I hope we have addressed your questions.
Okay, so we have a few more questions, and then we have less than 4 minutes. So I hope you can answer these in the quickest time. Dr. Mika is asking, you highlighted the strengths and you highlighted the strengths of the capabilities approach. Could you share any limitations of the approach or any considerations that you might have had to apply complementary frameworks? Then there's another question. Do we have enough resources to finance and implement the CA? Then the other question reads, okay. I seem not to see the other questions, but okay. So this question is, have you thought about the quality of the job a graduate obtains? Most of my master's students have jobs as teachers, but they are desperate to escape a job where they feel devalued by society. So the problem is not only having a job, but having a job where you are happy and feel valued and well paid. I don't know if this is the last question. My guess is okay. Okay, and then we have the last question. If we equate success to whether or not a student walks into employment, why are we framing the study in human development? So these should be our last questions. So we have less than 3 minutes. So if you can answer these in that amount of time, that would be great.
Over to you, Funke.
I just wanted to talk briefly about the question regarding the quality of the job the graduates obtain. Unfortunately, the quality of the job, and this speaks also to well-being, emotional well-being and psychological well-being speaks to that, because if you're not happy with what you do, then how fulfilled, or there's a whole lot of things that surround that as well. But when we are sitting with youth unemployment that's going in the 50%, I think it's going to be very, very difficult so people don't, what I'm trying to say is people don't then pay attention to the fact that, okay, so you have a job, you are not happy. Look at the millions that don't have anything. And I know it's not a nice way to put this in terms of well-being, but that's the kind of response that you have, people that you get in this kind of situation. And then when we talked about our framework, talking about value, one of the key elements that teachers spoke about during the focus group discussions was that the nature of the job was such that people are now entering it, exactly what you're saying here, just because they need something to do. That the respect and value that people added, that had for teachers in themselves had been eroded. that currently being a teacher is no longer something that gives them joy. Many of them said that. And that the way students are brought up, the way parents view teachers, and the way they communicate that their opinion of teachers to their children spills over into the classroom, where you know that whatever happens, you don't have a voice here. The parent is always right, the learner is always the right person, and that something needs to be done in order to keep people, or even to attract the best people to want to come into this kind of profession. So I really do agree. We are in this together because we are teachers as well, and we know what this is going to do. And that's why there's a lot of research also going on about well-being and our state of mind, and how we need to do something about that as well. Thank you. I know the time is up. So
yes, thank you so much. It's exactly 1 p.m. So please feel free to interact with Dr. Aluko and Dr. Omidire even outside this platform. But thank you so much to the two presenters for a lovely presentation today. We can give them a round of applause as we close. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.